Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the final weekend of the FHIR Basics Learning Initiative, uh, which was primarily driven by the FHIR India community and supported by HL7 India. So in the last weeks or last 3 or 4 weeks, what you went through was like uh, understanding of FHIR concepts one by one, right? So starting from what is FHIR, what are FHIR resources, to conformance, to even doing hands-on practicals, right? So that was like what last 3 weeks you were on to, right? So this particular weekend, when we are closing in, we want to make sure that we do a recap of the concepts that we learned so far. Okay, a quick recall, right? We'll not go into lengths, but we'll recap. We will also try to, as implementers, what are the resources available? How should we go about doing our things? Then we will talk about fire security, privacy, and clinical safety guidelines, because these are important when you are developing your apps. We will touch base on how to continue your fire learning, and then we will have the questions and answers and discussions. That's the agenda for today. And that's the agenda for the weekend. Means if we are not able to complete today, we will roll it over to tomorrow, right? So before we get started, as usual, the housekeeping, okay? Need not to say for the folks who have already attended the sessions, for the folks who are still new and who are attending it for the first time, if you are not on Zulip, please sign in on Zulip. You can scan the QR code. Take 30 seconds, just scan the QR code from your mobile phone and get on there. Okay, moving on. So we had the session's expectations covered. So before we start, it will be only fair to talk about the FHIR India community, because that is the community which is bringing in the this initiative, right? So FHIR India community, if you see, is a community of healthcare interoperability or healthcare interoperability enthusiasts, or you can say health tech practitioners who are keen on fire, who practice fire, but they're not limited only on fire, right? So in our community, we have clinicians, we have engineers, we have policy guys, we have government people, we have private sector politics, everyone is there, right? So doctors, engineers, policy, business analysts, you name it, and you find people in the interop community. So I urge everyone who is not yet part of the community to please join our LinkedIn group, so that the knowledge exchange, the sharing of information, the communication becomes easier, and we all can communicate together. So that's the LinkedIn group QR code. If you want to know more about the community, what we did was we just wrote a small article, and that article is the last URL. You can take a look at it. So you will get an understanding of what the community is. We do FHIR meetups. We do try to meet every month once. For last month, since we are doing the basics, FHIR Basics, we did not have any in-person meeting or the meetups, but these sessions itself were sort of meetups, right? And let's go. So you already know about the course design and thoughts. It's a community-driven course. The focus, we are not trying to make you expert. We are not trying to replace or substitute any of the formal trainings that HL7 provides or any other organization provides. As a community, we felt the need that there are a lot of people who struggle or who are looking for guidance on how to get started with fire. What are the resources available? What are the core concepts? How can I decide whether fire is good for me or not? So with those thoughts, and to help those folks in the community, we started this initiative. So the focus is on getting started, understanding the important concepts, and also try to build the community, right? So that it is self-sustaining and self-learning and a contributing community, right? So where we not only learn, share, but we also build stuff that can be of uh, what do you say, of public use, right? So that's the idea behind the course. And that's where the community members came in together. Okay, course layout, we intended to do 10 to 12 hours over 4 weekends. I think we have stretched much beyond 10 to 12 hours because each of our sessions, if I'm not wrong, were close to 2 hours. Okay, and the hands-ons sometimes went longer. We also had midweek expert sessions. So in all, I think close to 16 to 20 hours is where we are going to end at, right? Instead of 3 hours per weekend, we did 4 hours per weekend. Theory plus practical, bonus extra sessions we did. And yeah, discussions on Zulip. So now from our side, we did try to make it as interactive as possible and as inclusive as possible, right? So hopefully, as participants, you also got the same. You are understood the thing, and in near future, in the next sessions, we will welcome all the participants from this session to actually start contributing, building in sessions, start something new. Okay, before we start, any of the slides that we presented or any of the materials that we presented, these were not purely our creation. Okay, so we leveraged the wide spread worldwide FHIR community. We leverage the knowledge, we built on the knowledge that is already there, and we leverage some of the slides from the FHIR community members. So acknowledgement and credits. Okay. Now we'll start the recap. If there are any questions, I think our admins will be able to answer them. We will take a pause after the recap, and then we'll take some questions. Okay. All right. So how do we start a recap? The first thing is we need to know what is interoperability, what are the types of interoperability, and which is the interoperability that we are dealing with in FHIR, right? So let's talk about types of interoperability. So, you know, there are different types of interoperability, or there are different layers of interoperability you can think of. The first one is the technical interoperability or the technology layer. That's where I think most of the things fall in, right? So whether you are able to connect with the systems, where you are able to exchange data, where you are able to exchange messages, these are all coming in the technology layer. Semantic interoperability is more about the content and the meaning of the data, meaning of the information that is being exchanged. And this is where the terminologies, the codes, the semantic meaning, right? So using of SNOMED, using of terminologies, using of standardized nomenclature, all these things come into the semantic interoperability. So with FHIR, we are trying to address these two, right? So FHIR is basically addressing the technology layer, but it has mechanisms that the resources are designed such that semantic interoperability is made easy through FHIR. Process and clinical interoperability, that's the human layer. So technology can only do as much, right? You can have machines communicate to each other. You can have SNOMED encoded systems, LOINC encoded systems. But if the processes, it is the processes and the people, right, who are actually the end recipients or end beneficiaries of interoperability. And the processes and the clinical process and administrative process that have been set up in your organizations determine to large extent how much interoperability is possible within your organization. And the last one is also important, which is like institutional layers. So even if technology is there, semantic interoperability is there, people are willing, but there is the institutional layer, which is like the incentives are not aligned, the culture is not of sharing, right? Regulations prohibit data sharing. Then also the interoperability can get impacted. So in order to have a very seamless interoperable ecosystem, all these layers have to work together. Okay. Some of these are in the domain of technology, like the technology layer and the data layer, and others are more people concerned, right? The human layer and the institutional layer, right? So Just think of it like interoperability is never only a technical concern, right? So if something is broken, some interoperability is broken, if the systems are not working, just look at all the aspects, okay? So what are standards? I think we have already discussed. Standards are something which people agree to use, right? And typically, standards are vetted by some recognized institutions, right? Like HL7 is a recognized body. ANSI is there, ISO is there. And examples of standards are like FHIR, HL7 version 2.3, and CDA, DICOM, and so are the standards. So these all standards, if you see, they are a consensus document, consensus specification to solve a particular use case, right, in a given context. So those are the standards. Benefits of standard, we don't have to talk about. I think all of us know standards have multiplier effects, they avoid vendor lock-ins, they reduce cost, minimize risks, and this is not an exhaustive list, right? You can just go on narrative the benefits of standards. So whenever given a chance, lean towards standardization. That will pay you in the long run. As developers, as architects, as business analysts, always think in terms of standards. Don't try to develop something on your own. Right? Don't think whenever a new problem statement comes, first look at the global catalog of knowledge and see if that problem has already been solved. Are there some standards available? And try to leverage those, right? Okay. Now, standards and interoperability when it comes to integrations, right? So, for example, you are a healthcare system, and what we have seen is a typical healthcare system has anywhere more than 50 different healthcare entity systems that would need to be interconnected to exchange data, right? If you're not using standards, if you are developing point-to-point interfaces, correct? And each system has its own spec, and the other system has to follow the spec to be able to exchange data, right? What you will end up is in the combinatorial explosion. And what is a combinatorial explosion? That seems easy to manage at the beginning when you are starting. For example, for two nodes, if there are two systems to be connected, you just need one integration point to be developed, right? You can very well do in proprietary way. Now, suppose there are 6 systems to be managed, right? Suddenly the number of nodes or number of interconnections that you need to manage is 15 links you have to do. Okay. And if you have to connect 100 systems, see the explosion. It's like 4,950 in interfaces that you'll have to manage, right? If you're dealing with the proprietary interfaces and say that everyone talks their own language, correct? And the formula is also given. How do you calculate that? Okay. If you're using standard, everyone talks the same language. The thing is very simple. You just communicate using that. So you build one interface and that interface can connect with everyone. So that's how standards can help in interoperability. The benefits of using standards increase exponentially as the number of different systems that are needed to be linked. So that's a thing, right? So when we get started with anything, right, our first approach is let's do it in a custom way, because there are just 2 systems, right? But before we realize the 3rd system will get added, the 4th system will get added, and suddenly you will find it very difficult to manage a lot of interfaces. And this is an experience that everyone who has been dealing with healthcare systems has faced, right? Or even we as developers, right? When we start, right, our first approach is chalo custom kar lete hain, right? But be wary of that, right? As you grow, as you add more systems, it will be very difficult to maintain proprietary custom interfaces. Okay. Now we'll get into FHIR key concepts that we have learned over the last 3 weekends. So if I have to do FHIR in a slide, okay. The first is FHIR is an acronym. The full form of it is fast, healthcare interoperability resources. I think it's a no-brainer. And FHIR is pronounced as fire. Okay, so that's also you understood. Fast, the significance of fast you understood. That fast means relatively fast compared to other existing healthcare data exchange standards. Building interfaces, connecting systems with FHIR is relatively faster. What you could do in months with say V2 and V3, right? You can do it in days with FHIR. It's that fast, or even hours. Healthcare means FHIR is a healthcare specific data exchange standard. Okay, so FHIR is explicitly for healthcare. I is interoperability, and resources. Resources are the core building blocks of FHIR, as you have understood, right? So FHIR talks in terms of resources. We'll see what are resources, but that is the acronym. It's a standard from HL7. It's a web standard. It leverages the web standard. So what it means is the difference between other standards of the past and FHIR is built on open standards. The standards which are popular, which are used for a wide variety of things, FHIR has leveraged them and built on top of that. So which means that you don't need to have specialized knowledge to build on FHIR. Okay. Free and open, there are no licensing. FHIR is absolutely free to use, build, and open as in like the specification and everything is open. The community is open. And there are a lot of tooling that is available, which is open source, you can download. Implementer focused, community driven, right? The spec, the standard from day one is focused on implementation, how to make the implementation easy, how to make the life of the implementers easy. That's why with the specification, you also have reference implementations. You have validators, you have sample code, you have a lot of other implementer support channels which come from default, right, with FHIR, right? So that's the implementer focus and community driven. There is a wide community that drives this FHIR adoption. 140 plus resources, building blocks. Resources are like patient observations, diagnostic reports. FHIR's, what we have seen is FHIR separates the content from the delivery, right? So contents are encoded or represented in resources, whereas the exchange, the delivery is in the paradigms. So FHIR supports RESTful APIs, messages, documents, and services. And others are as well there, but these are the four main. Okay, specification available here. Then we come to the FHIR manifesto. This is something that is important. It's the same thing that we saw being in the first slide. I think the manifesto guides the specification. On this, what I wanted to focus on, which we did not talk in the earlier slide, is require human readability as the base level of interoperability. So any FHIR resource that you take, right, there is a narrative section. There is an optional narrative section, which can be populated while you are building the resources, which does not require anything. So you should, if you have a browser and the browser is capable of reading HTML, you should be able to understand the resource. You should be able to read the content of the resource. That's the human readability part. Means FHIR resources support narratives as an option. And the last one supports multiple paradigms and architectures. So what it means is there is no one way to implement FHIR. So it's not that there is only one true way or correct way of implementing FHIR. You can choose whatever way is best for you to implement FHIR. So the architecture, the technology that you are using, those are all internal to you, right? So FHIR does not dictate that, right? So it is open, or acceptance is there for any kind of architecture, any kind of paradigm. Okay. We have also seen something which is differentiating between FHIR and other standards is like FHIR is focused on making things simple, right? Making things simple and making things, what do you say, easier for implementation. And the first thing is make the resources as simple as possible and as widely used as possible, right? How can you do that? You can do that when you are having the resources which are used in most of the scenarios, right? And that's where the 80% rule comes, right? So in FHIR, the baseline rule is if something will make into the standard if it has a widespread usage, right? And that's the 80% rule. For other content, for other things, the corner cases, FHIR provides extensions. Through extensions, you can handle the narrow cases, edge cases, or corner cases, or something specific to you, right? This makes resources simple and easy to understand and use. Okay. As we talked, FHIR makes no assumption of architectural design and system. So you can have a broker-based FHIR interface. You can have a FHIR interface based on your directly a FHIR interface or a PHR app built on the FHIR specification itself. Or you can have your own legacy database on top of that, and there is an interface, and that exposes the FHIR. And you can have many other mechanisms, right? So it doesn't matter, right? As long as you are following the FHIR specs, you are able to communicate using FHIR resources, you are fine, right? And you can choose any of the paradigms that is available. Okay. Maturity levels is important, and we discussed this in one of the sessions. Maturity levels, in short, define or determine the acceptability of that particular resource or that particular FHIR artifact for implementation, right? The higher the maturity number, the more stable that resource is, more acceptable that resource is, and more widely tested that resource would be, right? Normative is something which is like a fairly stable resource, or not fairly stable resource, it's a stable resource that you can use it without any worries. Okay. So we talked about resources. So what are resources? You can think of resources as Lego blocks, right? Resources are Lego blocks. They are smallest entity or smallest unit of exchange in FHIR, okay? And they can be combined in a way. So I'll have this one, right? So this is a good way to represent FHIR resources. So resources are the base, smallest unit of exchange. They represent a unit of healthcare information, okay? The examples of resources can be patient, practitioner, observation, diagnostic report. These are all resources, right? You can merge, combine, reference resources to build a wide variety of use cases. So that's what this picture depicts, right? So using the Lego blocks, you can build either a helicopter or an ambulance or a hospital. So same thing, you're using FHIR resources, you can build whatever you want. You can build FHIR documents, you can build complete a PHR app use case, you can build a discharge summary, you can do whatever you want, right? So these are resources. Example of a resource also, we have seen that resource, a typical FHIR resource in the has four distinct sections. The first section is the metadata, which talks about the resource itself, when the resource was created, what is the security identified of the resource, what is the language of the resource, all those things in the first section, the metadata section. The second one is the human readability of the narrative section, where you describe the content of the resource. The third one is actually, we talked about the common scenarios, and we talked about the need of extensions. So if you are adding extensions, you can put in there. And then the fourth section is actual data. Okay. The RESTful paradigm, you have already seen. So this is like a typical web paradigm. So you can just go through it. I'll not explain. The only thing, the last thing I'll explain is FHIR resources can be represented or encoded as XML, JSON, RDF, or NDJSON. Okay, so NDJSON is new line delimited JSON, and RDF is the turtle feed. Okay, but primarily what we have seen is JSON to be the most widely used FHIR representation. XML is second. And if you are using bulk FHIR, right? If you are using FHIR for bulk data exchange, you are using the NDJSON. Okay, a typical FHIR URL you have already seen. There is the FHIR base, Then there is the resource type, and then there is the resource ID. Document paradigm, we already discussed in one of the sessions. A document is when you want to represent a document, right? A document has its own specific characteristics, right? If you want to represent a document, how can you do it in FHIR? So you have to use a composition resource to do that. Okay. If you want to use FHIR in a messaging ecosystem or in a messaging parlance, right? You can use that FHIR message header resource is something that you should be using. Okay. Now, as we saw, and as we discussed over the spread of the weekend, multiple weeks, that whatever said and done, right? FHIR resources are very, very flexible. They cater to a widespread use cases. It's a platform specification, which means that if there are two systems that they need to talk to each other, they need to have basic understanding of what each other have implemented, right? Within FHIR, right? Because a lot of things are optional, a lot of things can be added to FHIR, right? So for example, a FHIR server can choose to implement only a subset of resources, right? Only a subset of API features, right? It can choose from a wide variety of terminologies to implement, right? And then some profiles and other things, right? So you need a conformance resource to actually depict that, right? And that's where we have profiling. Profiling is first to make sure that you are able to use FHIR to represent your particular use case. You are able to say what are the attributes you are going to use in a particular FHIR resource, what terminologies you are going to use, what is the optional and mandatory that you are going to do, what are the rules you are going to set. And then you are going, as a FHIR server, you are going to expose your capability statement. A capability statement will tell the receiving system, the consumer, the complementary system, the partner system, what your server is capable of. Okay. Now, with that, we'll take few minutes. If there are any questions, we'll take. So we have done the recap. Now we'll get into the FHIR implementer resources. Okay. So if there are any questions, we can take up. If not, we get into the next session. On chat, any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
It is not related to the previous discussion, but in the last few sessions it was discussed. It is a concept mapping.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want to have a real life example of concept mapping.
Concept mapping, right?
Yes.
So concept map, as the name suggests, right? It's a mapping of a concept from one concept to other concept, right? So for example, a concept you can think of as say, you can think of a disease as a concept. Okay, I'm just extrapolating, right? And suppose it is represented in say standard terminology called ICD. Now, okay, so there is a concept, a code that is represented in SNOMED or say ICD. Okay, you want to map it to SNOMED, correct? That's where you can use the concept map resource. Concept map, what does it do? It does the source to destination mapping. So source code, source format, source naming system to a destination code, destination naming system. That's where the concept map is used. So if you want to represent the mappings, right, from one standard, one terminology to other terminology, you can use one concept to other concept, you can use concept maps. So from the source to destination, if you have to do mapping, right? So from LOINC to ICD, you have to do mapping. So from your proprietary, if you have to do a mapping to the standards, all these things you can represent in concept maps.
Okay.
It's just a mapping, right? It just says, this is my source, this is how the destination looks. And that concept maps can be used by systems who are implementing your resources, right? So if something is coming in a source format and if they have to translate into a destination format, they can just look at the concept map and do it.
Is it always one-to-one or one-to-many or many-to-many?
For that, I think I'll leave it to you to just go to the resource, concept map resource, and take a look at the definition, right?
Okay,
Okay.
I'll do so.
Okay. Is there any website that gives us which resource we have to use per requirement? For example, I have to send mechanism. I know this is not a silly question. This is, in fact, so Indrajit has a question. So this is not a silly question. This is, in fact, a very tough question, right? So there is a guidance that is available in FHIR, okay? And we did touch upon it, I think, in the first session. So there is a section on the FHIR documentation website, which gives a guidance, right? If you have to use a particular use case, where to go, right? But it's not exhaustive. It's very, very like indicative, right? For specific, if you want to use a particular resource, you have to go. So you take your use case, understand what are, so you try to understand like what are the concepts in healthcare you are trying to represent. Then go to the FHIR resources and the documentation and see which resources you think are matching your use case. And then go read the first line of that particular resource definition to figure out whether what you are intending, that resource meant for that, right? So that's how you will go about doing things. But the basic guidance, the indicative guidelines are given in the documentation. I think Silva or anyone, you can share that link, right? Or once we go to the documentation, I'll share the link. Akash has a question. When to use bundle type 1 composition, message, transaction? Can you please elaborate, giving a real-time example? So whenever you are trying to use a documents, for example, the regulation in India, right, ABDM, is saying that you have to use bundles, correct? In that case, you have to use composition, right? Type 1, what you have said, right? A composition record, because using composition only you can do documents, and documents is a requirement from ABDM. So when there is a requirement to exchange documents, you use composition. Similarly, when there is a requirement to use messages, so you are familiar with this event-driven architecture, right? So a request response, something you said, some acknowledgement has come, right? If you are building that kind of an architecture, similar to what the HL7 V2 was doing, then you can choose to use a message. Okay. Transaction. Transaction is something, so if you are having a bundle of resources, a lot of resources, and you want to have interaction or have transactions which are like complete, means all the transactions or all the operations that you have listed in the bundle should be completely, I mean, should be done in completeness, right? If you want to do that, right, you use transaction. If any of the operation fails, the transaction gets rolled back. So if you're trying to use transaction, it is more to make sure that all the operations that you have listed in the bundle operation are successful, right? So that's a good way to do when you are trying to put in a lot of resources. So for example, you are creating a patient, then after creating the patient, you're creating an appointment for the patient, and after creating the appointment for the patient, you're creating a visit. Now you want to make sure that all these three succeed, right, in your operation. In that case, you will use a transaction. So that
transaction was used in last week's hands-on to send a bunch of service requests for a doctor had ordered for 5 different investigations, right? And if it has to be sent from, let us say, the CPOE system to LIS, right? All the 3 of them has to be sent simultaneously. That's one very good example of transaction.
Yeah. So transaction. So whenever you want all your operations to be succeeded, or all the data that you have sent to be honored or successfully processed in the system, and if anyone fails, you don't want to continue. In that case, you want to use transactions. I think Selva Kumar has a question. Mostly organizations having existing proprietary application, but if they want to adopt FHIR standard, they cannot re-implement the application on FHIR server considering different reasons like expense. Is FHIR facade the best recommended way? Best recommended way, considering a reason like support for, is there any methods? Okay. So yeah, FHIR facade is one of the ways where people are implementing on their existing proprietary systems. So if you want to not change, right? And you can definitely use a FHIR facade. I have seen that is, and we are covering that also in our implementer resources, right? FHIR facade is a acceptable way of going forward, yes, which is more friendly or which is more economical, right? Than actually revamp the entire infrastructure. Okay,
Satyam, I was having one question, Praveen, this side.
go
So
ahead.
earlier I asked about, some of the places we use word artifacts and some of the places resources. So is it the same thing, or is it something which I'm missing? Difference between this artifact and resources.
See, so when I say artifacts, and I think it's like my interchange that I'm using, sorry for that. So resources are, when we are saying resources, resources are very specific FHIR resources. Okay, those are defined in the as FHIR resources. When I say artifacts, I'm talking about a general FHIR, all the things that FHIR has, right? So FHIR documentation, FHIR profiles, everything together I'm talking as FHIR artifacts.
Okay, thank you. Much clear now.
Artifacts means everything that FHIR specification is talking about.
Okay.
Arun Kumar, for interdepartmental integration within hospitals, should we use HL7 V2 or should we use FHIR? That's a trick question. See, today, right, majority of the older systems, right, or you can say 99% of the systems which used to communicate still use HL7 V2, right? And if HL7 V2 serves your purpose, please do use it. But there are scenarios where you have interdepartmental systems like a physician dashboard or a physician appointment management system, which takes in data from, say, the front desk and all, right? And the system was developed by some third party which uses APIs, right? In those cases, you can think of exposing FHIR, which will be easy. But again, majority of the use cases, if the systems support HL7 V2, there is no reason you should change or within the interdepartmental things. But if there are certain things which require APIs and all, I think you can choose to go on FHIR. I think there are no more questions, so we'll continue on the next one. So, okay, here when I mean resources, I mean artifacts, everything. Okay, so this is resources in general terms. Okay, FHIR implemented resources. Okay,
Right.
Resources in Hindi is what? Sansadhan, right? So that's what I'm talking about. I don't know what it is called in Kannada. Maybe Arun, you can say what is it Kannada, or Selva, you can. What is resources in Tamil? Or anyone in Marathi, or anyone you can translate. I don't know. Okay, so let's go. So for implementers, so next few slides we will cover things that will matter for when you are going into implementation. Okay, so pay attention to it, and if you have any questions, we will talk about it. Okay, so for implementers, I think you know that FHIR is open license, which means that you don't have to purchase a license to use FHIR. So that's the first decision point, right? So you can just go ahead, use FHIR. Okay. Now, there is a caveat. If you are using FHIR trademark, HL7 FHIR trademark, to denote your application, right? So, which is changing the meaning of the specification, right? So, for example, FHIR dashboard, right? Suppose you are using some kind of that kind of a thing, which gives you a different meaning, right? In that case, the trademark rule of FHIR applies. So where you have to get an approval from the HL7 trademark body to say that I am trying to use FHIR in this particular context. Is that okay, right? But if you are using FHIR for your regular interoperability exchanges and all, it's open, you can use it. When you are implementing, right, it's important to pay attention to the maturity model, okay? Because the maturity model also helps you understand what is the maturity of the resources that you're trying to use, right? And what is the risk that you are taking with going ahead with the resources of your choice, right? As we have discussed, the higher the maturity number or the level, the more stable the resource is, and you will have less breaking changes, correct? But as you know, FHIR is still evolving standard. A lot of resources are still in maturity model 2 or 3 or 1, right? If you intend to use those resources, just be cognizant of the risks or the need for change that you might have to take, right? So that's what the maturity model you can use it for. On implementers, you have reference implementations and libraries, so you don't have to implement FHIR specification from scratch. Okay, there are enough and more libraries, toolkits available in the download sections or on the GitHub that you can actually start using them, right? And you don't have to actually go and hand code each and every line of the spec, right? You can just start with the resources and APIs and go ahead from there. So, and the implementations are available in various languages from Java, .NET, Python, I think JavaScript, and so on and so forth. Public testing servers. So if you're building some clients, you're building some apps, right? You should leverage the public testing servers, because those public testing servers are reference implementations for use of the implementers. So that will be helpful. Leverage the community. So there is a FHIR community. So in case there is any question, any clarification, you can leverage the community. Participate in connectathons, because in connectathons, when you participate, your knowledge of the specification itself, how you implement and how others are implementing grows manifold. Okay. And these are, by the way, resources available, made available by FHIR as its focus of implementation, focus on implementers. Okay. Now, as implementers, you should be aware that FHIR is a platform standard, right? Which means that it caters to a wide variety of use cases. Okay. At different, using different architectures, right? FHIR implementers will come from different backgrounds. They may have exposure to previous HL7 standards or may not be, right? And as somebody asked, right, some would be constrained by the existing legacy system, right? So implementers come from, FHIR implementers are wide range and experience, right? And they come from all backgrounds. That's what it is. So don't see or think that if you come from a specific background, then you cannot implement FHIR. So as a implementer community, FHIR implementers are from various different backgrounds and context. Okay. Remember this 555 rule, and this will help anyone who is new to FHIR, who is coming onto FHIR, or even you are an expert and you sometimes get frustrated with FHIR, or sometimes you say, this FHIR is not working, right? Just remember this, the 555 rules, right? If you want to find anything on FHIR, it takes you just 5 seconds to like search and get onto that, right? So for example, I want to search for a diagnostic report in FHIR, right? I'll just say diagnostic report resource FHIR on Google, and it will land me to the right spec. 5 minutes it will take for you to actually go skim through the resource to understand what is this, how to work, and all these things. And same for the FHIR API specification, RESTful, FHIR search parameters, and all. And if you have experience in developing code, I think in 5 hours you should have a basic code working, right? So that's why it is 555 rules. Okay, it's that simple. Okay, but remember this: it takes minimum of 5 years to actually develop understand healthcare applications development, right? So don't get frustrated. Okay, uh, you will start working FHIR. If you see FHIR specification or healthcare is like a pyramid, or you can say a iceberg, right? Getting in is easy. The first use cases are very, very simple, right? Appointment, I can make it, right? But then when you're getting into the slot, schedule, and various use cases, that's where the nuances will start coming in, right? Same thing for clinical resources and all. It's very easy to start with a form to capture diagnostic report, patient's chief complaints, diagnosis, and medication and all. But if you get into the details of it, I think then the complexity will start, right? So while you make faster progress, sometimes the progress might feel like it's not happening. Don't get disheartened. This is a cumulative wisdom that it takes around 5 years to understand the development in healthcare, to understand the healthcare domain itself and to develop. So keep at it. Hopefully this was an eye opener for some of you, okay, who are into healthcare development and might have faced issues and might have said like, why does it not work? Ye chalta kyun nahi hai? Why are the people frustrated? Right? It takes time. Take patience. Okay. Now, some guidance for newbies or people who are like coming on board and starting to use FHIR, right? Remember, test using public servers, right? So don't try to start your own server and try to test against it, right? So if whenever there is an option, use public test servers to test your FHIR resources or FHIR APIs or whatever you are doing. Because the test public servers are actually reference implementers, they are used by a lot of people, they are mature. Okay, they represent, they implement wide varieties of FHIR artifacts, means more wide coverage of the APIs, parameters, resources, and all, right? So as a guidance, please use public servers. Choose a reference implementation as possible, if possible, which means that if possible, choose a reference implementation to start on it. Keep in mind, writing client is easy. So if you are building an app for patient registration, patient appointment, prescription generation, it's quite easy if it's a client, right? Because you have less number of things to deal with. You have to just deal with your use cases. Building a server is a little bit harder because you have to take care of a lot of other nuances, okay? It's possible to generate code from schema. FHIR provides you the schematrons, but as you know, code generation is not that accurate. So if you are generating code from schema, pay attention to it. The last thing, as you know, that there are a lot of things which can go wrong, right? Because of the sheer complexity of the domain, right? So FHIR also gives you a implementer safety checklist. Whenever you are building an app, whenever you are trying to build something, just go through that checklist and make sure that you are using that checklist as you go, as you implement. We'll see the checklist also. So, but this is something that we want to help you. Okay. What are the tools available for implementers? Test servers. So the first question is, where are the test servers located, right? So this is the link. If you go to the Confluence, display FHIR public test servers, that's where you find all the test servers listed, and there are plenty of them. If you want to validate your resources, there are Java validators available, and there are other validators also. I picked in Java validator because I worked with that. There are plenty of open source implementations like Happy, .NET is the FHIRly, and so others. If you want to have a look at all the implementation guides that are there, all the other resources that are there, go to FHIR.org. FHIR.org maintains a complete repository or registry of all the implementation guides that you can use. There is also a Notepad++ plugin. So if you're using Notepad++, and if you want to talk about FHIR, means you want to just look at FHIR resources and do some validation, basic validation, actually you can try out the Notepad++ plugin. It's a decent one, not that stable. No, it's stable as well. Not rich, very rich in functionality, but it's good. Okay. And at any given
What does this Notepad++ plugin do?
So you can actually, so if you're opening a resource, right? And if this plugin is there, right? It will help you in syntax highlighting. It will tell you what is there, what is not there. A kind of something that you use VS Code for, right? The syntax highlighting, the resources, and other things, you can take a look at it. It's good, means now Notepad++ plugin can help you identify resources and do some basic operations with them. In case you have any doubts, any questions, you can join the FHIR global FHIR community, that is chat.phir.org. Hopefully now you have experience with Zulip. During this session, we used Zulip a lot because Zulip is the tool of choice, the discussion for tool of choice for the global FHIR community. So if you're familiar with Zulip now, you can just get on to chat.phir.org and start discussing, interacting, asking your questions. Okay, the implementers community is huge there. And we also have our internal community. You can definitely be there. Okay. For more resources, you can go to general topic, useful links, right? So maybe somebody, I think Arun or Silva, if you can just go to this particular link, right? So it's in under generals channel, general stream, and the topic is useful links. And maybe you can just say hi so that it becomes available for everyone. Okay. So now we'll get into something like client and server and all this.
Just can you go back to the previous one so that I can get the just a minute. FHIR, Zulip, Naru, stream.
I can put it in your chat.
Yeah.
I don't know how to put it.
You have to come out of presentation mode and then copy paste.
And if somebody finds a good link, you can just put it there. Why is it coming like this? Okay, I sent it. All right. So what are FHIR clients and servers, right? So FHIR clients and servers in RESTful terms, they are all using RESTful APIs. Clients are like applications. They typically use CRUD operations and then some UI interactions, right? They are mostly responsible for the user interface and response, right? So that's the FHIR clients. And servers typically deal with a lot of other things apart from serving resources, right? Performance, security, threading, searching, indexing, persistence, these are all concerns of servers, right? And that's why like building clients is fairly more simpler than actually building clients, building servers. Okay. So when we are building an application, when you are building a FHIR application, right, there are some decisions that you have to make, right? One of the decisions is whether you are going to use a push mechanism or a pull mechanism, right? So pull or push is like when the information is available, how do you want to get the information or share the information, right? That's the push or pull, right? So for example, if you are a FHIR client and if you are generating some resources, you will push those resources as CRUD operations to the FHIR server. If you're a FHIR server, you allow the clients to pull resources, pull data from you, right? You can also try to configure webhooks and others, right? So one of the decisions that you need to make is push or pull. then choose, when you're implementing a server, right? You have to choose like what are the services that the server must offer, right? At minimum, at a baseline, you must implement conformance statement, okay, or the capability statement, okay? This is the baseline or the mandatory resource if you're implementing any FHIR app, okay? And then if you're implementing a server, you should decide on certain things like what resources you are going to support, those resources, what kind of operations, search parameters you are going to support. Are you going to support create or update? Are you going to support delete, versioning? These are the questions, the concerns that as a FHIR implementer, you should think of before jumping in, right? So these are like your back of the envelope, or you can say back on the paper, right? When you're planning for implementing a server, pay some attention to these things. Don't just jump in, right? So you have to be careful in selecting what resources you're going to support. And for those resources, what are the operations you're going to support, right? Remember, FHIR is what do you say? Accepting any level of, means it's providing you the flexibility, right? So the onus comes with flexibility, the onus comes on you to choose what you want to implement, okay? And this is the last line that is very important, right? And that is where some people get confused. Since you are interacting with APIs and you are exchanging resources, right? How they're implemented internally is irrelevant, okay? And I think that should answer a lot of the questions that you all would have in mind, right? How to implement FHIR internally doesn't matter. As long as your APIs are FHIR compliant, you are exchanging resources and the data is all represented in the resources. How you do it internally is your matter, right? FHIR does not do any, FHIR does not prescribe anything. And that is a very important and a powerful statement, okay? This is somebody asked whether to do FHIR facade and all, right? So this question is there, or this slide answers that, okay? So what we have seen, and this is based on the experience of the FHIR community, fresh grounds of FHIR server speaking FHIR natively is a rare occurrence, okay? The use cases are not as much, okay? Or there are enough legacy systems, enough legacy applications that you don't see many native FHIR servers. Yeah, Google has given you a FHIR server, Azure, AWS, everyone has given it, right? But they're rare, and how you use it, again, you have to tie it up with your data and other things, correct? So they are rare. What we have seen, and what what even the question was, like, majority of the times it's a FHIR facade, okay? And the FHIR facade can be implemented through different mechanisms, right? Again, as I told, FHIR as a specification, as a standard, does not prescribe what you should be using. As long as you are communicating in FHIR resources using FHIR paradigms, you're fine, right? So you can use middleware, right? Middleware like interface engines. You can build FHIR facades. You can actually have a clinical data repository, right? So you can have a transactional system giving it to a data store, and from data store you can expose as FHIR. That is what some of the guys do. Or you can have a gradual adoption of FHIR. So, and more, right? So these are some of the strategies that we have seen on the ground, right? There can be other strategies. The point to note is how you implement FHIR is up to you. Whatever is suiting you, whatever is best for you, right? That's what it is. Or that's what the meaning of this is. Now, other question that people ask was like, when I create a resource, I send something. I send a patient payload, but when I do the read, the resource has more data or less data, right? So that's okay. So the FHIR resources, the read and create can have differences. And they can have differences because of various reasons. Some of the reasons are like the metadata gets added. some constraints might get applied, like the security constraint that get applied that can redact your data, and so on and so forth, right? So you can take a look at FHIR updates HTML to see like in what are the scenarios where you can get the differences. But the bottom line is there can be differences between the resources that you created versus the resources you are getting, right? And there can be different reasons for it. So it's not wrong. Okay. Then when you have decided on the APIs, you have decided on the resources, you have decided on the pull versus push, you have decided on how to do stuff, right? Then the main consideration that comes in, like, how do I store data, right? Shall I store in native? Shall I store in my RDBMS? What should I do, right? Again, you know the answer, right? It all depends on what you want to do and what is comfortable for you, right? There are pros and cons of any of the approach that you take, okay? For example, if you're storing in natively, say, FHIR resources, then with gradual updates and gradual over a period of time with multiple versions and updates and all, I think it will be very, very difficult for you to maintain the referential integrity, right? What if some of the resources that you had got deleted? So you're referring to, say, a practitioner resource, the practitioner resource is deleted now. Now what happens to your FHIR resource that is referring to that resource, correct? Those all things, the referential integrity comes into picture when you are when you're natively storing the resources, right? So you have to take care of those and you have to see like how you can implement them. When you're doing RDBMS, again, the complexity comes from how do you break down the resources and design your RDBMS or relational databases. You can do a mix and match of both. Some discussion around that is there on the FHIR URL storage.html. You can take a look at it. Again, you have to consider the pros and cons and choose a strategy. Okay. You very well, blending can be a very well strategy. Some of the things I'll put it in relational databases, some of the things I'll put in a document database. Correct? That's a fair strategy. But the idea is whenever you're doing something, just have a proper, what do you say? Have a thought around it, like why you are doing things, and the rationale should be well reasoned out. Okay. Now, FHIR formats, right? So you have to also determine like what FHIR formats you want to do, right? So, for example, JSON, XML, and all. So you have to choose that. Okay. So that brings us to the end of the next session, right? The second session, which is FHIR implementers, some of the guidance or some of the things as a FHIR community that we should be knowing, right? So we take a pause here, okay? Then the next session is on FHIR security and privacy, okay? We can take it today or we can take it tomorrow, okay? As per the participants' interest, right? But let's see first if there are any questions.
There is a question from Purushottam. Can the middleware convert existing data in DB to FHIR resources as well as convert the incoming FHIR resources to DB and respond for the search? Difference between FHIR facade and middleware.
Good question. So see, the first one is simple yes. That's the role of all interface engines, right? You receive a FHIR resource and you convert it into a native store and put it there or do a search and all, correct? And vice versa. You get the data from your database, convert it into FHIR resource, share it outside. That's what it is, right? And you can respond to search and all. Now that's interface engines have limitations. As such, like you can't expect them to be a full API server, right? Responding to complex searches and all, because it becomes difficult, right? And that's where the FHIR facades come into picture. FHIR facades are nothing but, again, implementations. So there is no difference. You can implement FHIR facade on a middleware also. What a facade does is facade gives you a capability statement and it tells you what resources you are implementing and what are the implementations you are doing, right? So there is no difference. FHIR Facade is a mechanism which can be implemented as a server, a plain server, which ties up to your backend, or it can be implemented on a middleware also, or interface engine also. What we have seen is with interface engines, there are certain limitations that we hit. Right, we cannot do a lot of API operations, right, or complex ones, right, on middlewares. So there you can choose that these are portions that I'll do on the interface engine. These are the portions that I'll do in a separate server. So FHIR Facade is nothing but a facade server, which on the backend is actually masquerading as your DB interface, right? So middleware can also implement facade. So there is no difference.
Can I answer some more on that?
Yes.
So what is middleware and what is the difference between a facade server? Now, we know that V2, there are several implementations, right, across the world. Now, rather than investing in a facade server, some of the customers, they prefer to do a conversion from V2 to FHIR and FHIR back to V2. So essentially, you are not even having a facade server over there, right? You are just doing the translations from one way to another way, especially when it comes from an inbound perspective, right? So from an inbound perspective, you're expected to be FHIR compliant. So you get the data as FHIR JSONs. That FHIR JSONs is converted into V2 and sent to an existing endpoint, existing place that can receive V2. And you might be aware, right? V2 can be received either as a file or it could be received over a TCP/IP connection. And more recently, you have HL7 V2 on HTTP. So this is a middleware approach of using FHIR. For this facade is not going to work. Where are you going to use facade? Where you have access to the data store either directly or indirectly. And what do I mean by directly or indirectly? You can actually do a read and write into the data tables. Or an indirect way of writing it is that you have your existing APIs and you are creating a wrapper across the existing APIs. Right, and that is a time when when a facade server works very well. So it is dependent upon what is the implementation when you need to use a middleware versus a facade. Purushottam, did I answer your question?
Yes, thanks, Satyam. I got some good clarity on that. I'll check it out.
Okay.
Maybe I can.
Next question. Go ahead. Who is that?
Okay, Silva here. Maybe I can give a quick
Please.
real-time example where we used the middleware. So our system is like not FHIR one, but we need to interact with immunization system. So in that case, our system expects a particular module, the data in FHIR standard, but the immunization system, we can send query using V2 and get the response in V2. So it's just transformation we have to do. So for that, in Myth Connect, we have exposed an API. So one system can talk to Myth Connect like a FHIR server, that the API URL patient URL in the URL. So it can send the first name, last name, and to that API, and that data will be transformed to a V2 message as a query. It will talk to send to immunization system, and the response will come in V2 version, and that response Myth Connect transforming that to FHIR standard format and responding back to the application in FHIR standard. So as Arun explaining, I was able to map that. It just for the transformation, that middleware case, we don't need to. It's just one use case. Implementing a FHIR facade server, maybe cost-wise, it will be cost and resource-wise, it will be higher. So it's just one use case. So using Web Connect, a kind of middleware to transform the data, was a better solution for this particular use case.
Thanks, Selva.
Yeah.